When it comes to legendary Pokemon, they are usually very rare and unique. But over the years, many fans have believed that legendary Pokemon have lost their appeal over the years due to the amount that you can get in a lot of the newer games. From Generation 8 and Gen 9 and even Gen 7 have been the games that many people have pointed the finger at that have destroyed the credibility of how rare legendary Pokemon are. But today, we're going to be going over the history of all the legendary Pokemons across all generations, and we'll see if they really are no longer as special as people say. We've obviously got the original 5 legendary Pokemon of Zapdos, Moltres, and Articuno, and Mewtwo and Mew. But Mew is not classed as a legendary, Mew is classed as a mythical. Though many fans count it as a legendary, but it is still pretty much a mythical, which is the category it was put in. Generation 2 began the trend of having the box art legendary on the cover of the Pokemon games, because the original Pokemon games did not have the legendary Pokemon on the box art. The original games in Generation 1 was just the starter Pokemon and also Pikachu. So really Gen 2 onwards has just been following a trend that has been going for years, where they just show the legendary Pokemon on the cover. Gen 2 started this trend with Lugia, Ho-Oh, and Suicune for Gold, Silver, and Crystal. Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, Generation 3 continued that trend onwards with Groudon, Kyogre, and Rayquaza, and so on and so forth. But why do fans continue to say that legendary Pokemon are not as special as they used to? Well, in Generation 2, you could only capture Lugia, Ho-Oh, Suicune, Raikou, and Entei. They were the only legendary Pokemon you could catch in the original Generation 2 games, which made a lot of sense. The Kanto legendary Pokemon were not available in the original Gen 2 game. Though there were rumors suggesting that they were at one point going to be a part of the game, they were scrapped, which is what was rumored. Which that all ended up changing by Generation 4, when a remake for the Gold and Silver games eventually came out. Generation 3 had the Regis, Regirock, Regice, Registeel, Latios and Latias, and Kyogre, Groudon, and Rayquaza, and 2 mythicals known as Deoxys and Jirachi. So this was the generation that really started to pump in the legendary Pokemon. Well, as I said, 2 of them were mythical, so it's really hard to say. Gen 2 had their own mythical called Celebi. Gen 2 had its own mythical as well, known as Celebi. Each generation has its own mythical. And in Gen 3, you could not recapture any of the old generation legendaries. It was only Groudon, Kyogre, Rayquaza, the Lati twins, and the 3 Regis. You could technically get Deoxys, but Deoxys was a mythical and you had to do some kind of rare, super rare Pokemon event for you to get your hands on a Deoxys. Jirachi, there was no real way to get it unless you had the bonus disc for Pokemon Colosseum, which there's no way in hell people would have been able to get their hands on that. Unless you're really, really lucky. So that was the only way you could have gotten Jirachi legitimately outside of the Gen 8 remake, until you get to Generation 8, which is when they remastered everyone's favourite remakes, Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. That was the other than the bonus disc for Pokemon Coliseum. That was the only way Jirachi would have been able for people to get their hands on a legitimate Jirachi. Mew was also the same thing. Mew was very hard to get your hands on, considering it's a mythical. Mythicals are way more harder to get your hands on than just straight up legendary Pokemon. Gen 4, Gen 4 went super crazy with the legendaries of the Lake Spirits of Uxie, Azelf, and Mesprit, Dialga, Palkia, Giratina, Heatran, Regigigas, Cresselia, Darkrai, Shaman, Manaphy, Fione, and Arceus, the god of all Pokemon. Generation 4 did not have old legendary Pokemon appearing in those games either. You could not find... Actually, I am incorrect. I am incorrect. Gen 4 was the first game that actually sort of started this trend, because in Pokemon Platinum, there was a really small chance that you could capture Zapdos, Moltres, and Articuno in the post-game. Now, I think they were the only ones you could get. I think they were the only old generation legendaries you could get in Pokemon Platinum, but that was Pokemon Platinum, the superior version of Gen 4. Gen 5. Now, technically, there is one other Gen 4 game we need to talk about, and that is the Gold and Silver remakes of Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Yes, Generation 3 technically had remakes as well, with Kanto being Fire Red and Leaf Green, but you couldn't encounter the Gen 2 and Gen 3 legendaries in that game, so that's why I am skipping that one, and we're going straight to the Heart Gold and Soul Silver remakes. The Heart Gold and Soul Silver, which is the remakes of Gold and Silver, were the first Pokemon games that started beginning the whole capturing old legendaries, which obviously you can only get them via the post-game. Post-game, for those that don't know what post-game means, it's after you collect all 8 badges and beat the Pokemon League, and then the game continues on after that. That's the post-game. And in the post-game, you can get 8 more gym badges, which is the Kanto gyms, beat Trainer Red, which is on top of Mount Silver, and then so much more is available to you in those games. You can catch the 3 legendary birds, Zapdos, Moltres, and Articuno in those games. You could catch the roaming Latios or Latias, depending on your game, because they always like making some of these legendaries exclusive to certain games. And also you could catch a Groudon or Kyogre, depending on your game. And if you had both Groudon and Kyogre that you caught in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, put them both in one game, you catch Rayquaza. You could capture Rayquaza, which Rayquaza in that game is the lowest you could ever catch a Rayquaza at level 50. Rayquaza is always found at level 70, very high level. But that is one of the first games where you can actually get a really low level Rayquaza. But 50 isn't really that low level, but it's considered pretty low to the standard legendaries, because usually legendaries are usually below 50. They are usually below level 50. Gen 5, Black and White, the original Black and White, the first ones only had their box art legendaries, which was Zekrom and Reshiram, and the Swords of Justice, Cobalion, Terrakion, and Virizion, and technically Keldeo, but you cannot get him until Sword and Shield. And there was also a few other mythicals, and there were 3 other legendaries known as Tornadus, Thundurus, and Landorus, and a mythical Pokemon known as Genesect, and another mythical known as Victini. Yep, this game had 2 mythicals. So, there's that. And then Black and White 2 just started scattering a lot of the older legendaries. Like Cresselia, the Lake Spirits, I think Groudon and Kyogre are caught in those games, I can't remember for sure. And also the Reggies. So Black and White just started scattering a lot of the older legendaries in other areas, again, once you've beaten the entire game, aka the post-game. Gen 6 did not do any of this. Gen 6, which is X and Y, only brought back Mewtwo and one of the legendary birds, depending on your starter that you chose. Other than Mewtwo and one of the legendary birds, the only legendaries you get is your Box Art legendary, Xerneas or Yveltal, or Zygarde. So that's technically 5 legendaries. They didn't bring back any of the older ones. Which some people thought that was a bit of a bad thing, but I also looked at it as a positive thing. But I also kind of looked at that as maybe that was a positive thing, but I will admit, at the time I was kind of disappointed that they didn't have other legendaries in those games. And then Gen 7 happened, and no new legendaries in Gen 7, well, old ones I should say. Gen 7 had the Ultra Beasts, who I don't really consider legendaries. Many people consider them legendaries, but I don't really call them legendaries. They're just aliens from another dimension. Even the anime don't consider that, and even the anime considers them that. And also Cosmog, Solgaleo, Lunala, and the Tapus are really the only true legendaries in that game. And I also guess the Crozma as well. They were the only true legendaries. But that was just the original Sun and Moon. When they did the second versions of Sun and Moon, Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, basically doing a Black and White 2 for the Sun and Moon games, they brought back all the legendaries for those games. Basically making them all catchable during the Ultra Wormhole adventures, where you're just going through Ultra Wormholes trying to find legendary Pokemon. This was when fans really got pretty annoyed at them just rehashing old legendaries. But I guess there is one other remake I need to talk about really quickly before we move on to Generation 8. The other remake we need to talk about is the remakes of my favorite generation, Generation 3, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. In the post-game of that game, you can catch Rayquaza, which makes sense, because Rayquaza was always catchable in the post-game in Ruby and Sapphire, just not Emerald version. You could catch Rayquaza soon after you were done with the whole story with Groudon and Kyogre. Which was basically you going to get Rayquaza, and then Rayquaza comes down, stops Groudon and Kyogre from arguing, goes back home to the Sky Pillar, goes back to its home in the Sky Pillar, and then you can just go catch Rayquaza before you even get the 8th gym badge, and before you even get the Pokemon League. That was only done in Emerald. But yeah, because Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire are remakes of Ruby and Sapphire, they went with the Ruby and Sapphire story where you get Rayquaza in the post-game. But in the post-game, you could catch the mythical Pokemon Deoxys, which that was one of the strong positives that I really loved from that game. That you could catch a mythical Pokemon, the first time in its kind that you can get a mythical Pokemon in the actual main cartridge of the game itself. But also in ORAS, they brought back a lot of the old legendaries. You could find the Lake Spirits, you could find Cresselia, you could find Zekrom or Reshiram, you could find Kyurem, you could find Tornadus, Thundurus, and Landorus, you could find Dialga, Palkia, Giratina, Suicune, Raikou, Entei. They brought back a lot of the older legendaries. in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, and even Ho-Oh and Lugia. Surprisingly, not Mewtwo, which was probably the biggest surprise out of all of the legendaries that they did not bring back. So yeah, the remakes really started making... So the remakes really started to make people really get sick and tired of always catching these legendaries, making them not as very rare as the games went on. And then we get to Generation 8, my favorite, one of my other favorite generations, the Sword and Shield era. You could only catch them box art legendaries until basically the post-game when you've beaten the entire game. And that's really it. Eternatus, Zacian and Zamazenta were the only legendaries you could catch in that game until the DLC. Until the DLC, they added the legendary Pokemon Cubfu that you could evolve into Urshifu, and then the other DLC introduced another new legendary called Calyrex, where you could either ride on Glastria or Spectria. Where you can either also get Glastria or Spectria, which is the noble steed that Calyrex used to ride on as its noble steed, as he called it. And they added 2 new Regis, Regieleki and Regidrago. They brought back the 3 original Regis, and they basically did Zapdos, Moltres, and Articuno again, just in a Galarian form. And they brought back Regigigas, and they brought back all the legendaries, even the Ultra Beasts, for the Dynamax Adventures. So they basically locked all the legendaries in the little Dynamax Adventure thing. Again, not including the Mythicals, because you could never get the Mythicals. They never let you catch the Mythicals. Even though I just told you that even though I just told you Deoxys was caught in the remakes of Ruby and Sapphire. And then Generation 9, which is the biggest offender out of them all. I think Gen 9 is the real offender to this video. Kyurydon and Miraidon. Basically, you are given them at the start of the game. Yes, you get your starter Pokemon, but you're basically just handed Miraidon and Kyurydon to help you ride around the region. Which they're the legendary Pokemon of the game. And they're on the freaking box art of the game. And yes, I know there's another Kyurydon and another Miraidon you can get after you beat the main story, but I don't consider that, but they're just the Kyurydon and Miraidon you get after you battle the professors in Area 0. And then they added Ogerpon, the Loyal 3, and then Terrapagos. And then they brought back a lot of the older legendaries once again. Not all of them, though. They left out the X and Y legendaries, which is Xerneas, Yveltal, and Zygarde. But mostly, all the older legendaries came back. And I guess also they didn't include Eternatus, Zacian, and Zamazenta as well. But yeah. So have legendaries really over-expired? Have they really... have their mystique of being super rare and ancient really lost their style over the years, considering all these games continue to bring them back? Personally, I love legendary Pokemon hunting. It was always one of my favorite things. It's always been my favorite things about Pokemon, just hunting for all the different legendaries. So I don't really see it as that bad of a thing. But I can also understand why people would look at this as this devalues legendary Pokemon. And this devalues the legendaries, this devalues their status of being super rare and ancient. That you can only find them one time per playthrough. I can understand that side of things. I can absolutely 100% understand that side of things. But overall, I don't think it destroys their status as legendaries, but I definitely do agree that I definitely do agree that continuously bringing the older legendaries back in newer generations can get pretty stale and boring really, really quickly. So that's really all I've really got for you guys for this video. What do you guys think? Do you guys think they should stop bringing back the legendary Pokemon and just focus on the newer ones? And continue and just make legendary Pokemon feel special again? Or are you okay with older legendaries coming back in the newer generations of Pokemon? Be sure to let me know your thoughts down below, and I will see you all in the next video.